For centuries, we've been on this incredible journey, first trying to read, then judge, and now actually rewrite the very code of life itself. This is a story that goes from simple classification all the way to creation, and it forces us to ask some really deep questions. Who are we? And who exactly do we have the right to become? So let's just start with this quote. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. I mean, let that sink in for a second. That wasn't whispered in some dark alley. That was a declaration from the highest court in the United States. And what's really wild is that this shocking statement, it wasn't the start of a dark chapter, it was the culmination of one. To really get how we got to that point, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, back to when science first tried to simply read the human blueprint.
All right, part 1, reading the blueprint. This story begins, ironically enough, right in the middle of the Age of Reason. This was a time when this noble, scientific quest to classify all of nature, well, it turned its gaze away from plants and animals and looked directly at us, at humanity itself.
And what's so fascinating and frankly disturbing here is that the father of taxonomy himself, Carl Linnaeus, he wasn't just categorizing people by geography. No. He was assigning them moral and psychological traits. He was essentially coding social hierarchy into biology. So this wasn't just science or observation. It was a scientific-sounding justification for destiny. From there, the focus shifted from theory to what they called hard data. This kicked off the era of craniometry, where scientists literally measured skulls to try and quantify intelligence. But it was a rigged game from the very start. The data wasn't objective at all. It was completely warped by prejudice. It was using the prestige of science to give a respectable cover to the social hierarchies that already existed. So now we're judging the blueprint. This is where things take a turn. All that reading and classifying led directly to a much more dangerous idea, that the human blueprint wasn't just something to be understood, but that it should be actively judged and, in their view, improved. And you really had 3 key figures who built the whole intellectual framework for this new age. You had Herbert Spencer, who took survival of the fittest and applied it to society, basically arguing we shouldn't help the poor. Then there was Francis Galton, who thought we should be breeding humans for desirable traits, just like we do with livestock. And then Cesare Lombroso, who claimed you could spot a born criminal just by looking at the shape of their head.
And the name for this whole new movement? Eugenics. It was coined by Darwin's own cousin, Francis Galton. It comes from the Greek for well-born, and it was nothing less than an explicit plan to apply the rules of animal breeding directly to people. The goal was simple and pretty chilling: control the gene pool.
So we've read it, we've judged it, now we're going to enforce it. And that's the thing, these weren't just academic theories. They did not stay in the lab. They were translated from dusty books and papers into brutal state-sponsored policies that would end up affecting tens of thousands of real human lives. And this timeline just shows you the straight chronological line. The United States was actually a global pioneer in eugenics legislation. American laws, American research, they provided a direct legal blueprint that the Nazi regime would later adopt and, of course, take to its most horrific and logical extreme.
Okay, so let's jump to today. Part 4, rewriting the blueprint. The crude, awful methods of the past have been replaced by these incredibly precise molecular tools. But many people argue that these new technologies are really aimed at the exact same goal: selection, improvement, and ultimately design. So today, this whole process starts with in vitro fertilization, or IVF. You have multiple embryos created in a lab. But then comes this absolutely critical step. A few cells are carefully removed from each little embryo for genetic testing. And what this does is it creates a detailed scorecard, which allows parents to review all the data and then select which embryo they want to bring to term.
And believe me, this technology has gone way beyond just preventing simple, single-gene diseases. There's a new method called polygenic screening that scans thousands of genetic markers to create a probability score for incredibly complex traits. It's basically commercializing the selection of characteristics like height, or even giving you estimates of future IQ. It's bringing the core logic of eugenics right into the modern fertility clinic.
But the next step, well, it's even more profound. We've moved from simply selecting the best available blueprint to actively rewriting the code itself. And back in 2018, this officially stopped being science fiction. The birth of the first gene-edited babies proved that we now have the power to make permanent, heritable changes to the human species itself. So now we arrive at the big question: owning the blueprint. This incredible technological power has ignited this deep philosophical conflict over a really fundamental question:
Who or what now has the ultimate authority to design human life?
And you can really frame this as a clash between two totally competing worldviews. On one hand, you have the imago Dei, or the image of God. This is the idea that human value is inherent, it's sacred, it's a gift. On the other hand, you have the imago Homo, the image of man, which argues that no, value is conditional. It's something to be measured, graded, and ultimately engineered for perfection.
And this table right here, this is where it all comes to a head. It just lays out the core of that conflict. Is a human being a sacred creation, or are we a manufactured product? Is our DNA some kind of sacred blueprint, or is it just programmable code that we can hack and improve? And maybe the most profound question of all, is death a spiritual transition to be accepted, or is it just a technical glitch, a bug in our biological hardware that science is supposed to solve?
And you know, this view of DNA as programmable code isn't just some metaphor. The information storage density is so ridiculously immense that it reinforces this powerful idea that the human body isn't some vessel for a soul, but that it's the ultimate biological hard drive. And if it's a hard drive, well, it can be debugged, it can be upgraded, and it can be optimized.
Which leaves us with the profound question of our time. Right now, we are standing on the cusp of rewriting our own evolution. And we are being forced to decide, is the human blueprint a sacred mystery that we should protect at all costs, or is it a programmable code that we're meant to perfect? The answer to that is going to define what it means to be human for all the generations to come.